Hey, it's Thomas. Welcome back to the channel. Have you ever picked up a shiny new Overdrive pedal? You've been really excited, you've got back home, you've plugged it into your rig, but been disappointed. Yes, it's happened to me too, and it absolutely sucks. But fear not, as today, I have 5 tips for you that's going to help you get the most out of those shiny, lovely little boxes. Let's get right into it. Let's go. Alright, real quick before we get into the tips, let me just show you the signal chain. So it's literally just my guitar using a Boss cable, the new premium cables in fact. Really awesome cables. Been using these for the last couple of months on stream, and my guitar tones have never sounded better, and the feel is just absolutely incredible, so well done Boss. But otherwise, it's my guitar going through an Overdrive pedal, and today we're using the Horizon Devices Apex preamp. It's a great Overdrive pedal, but honestly, the presets and platform tips and tricks that I'm going to show you today, it applies to many Overdrive pedals. In fact, over the last couple of months on stream, we've had many Overdrive shootouts, and they've all sounded great. So guitar into my Overdrive pedal, and then straight into the amp, and the amp that I'm using today is the Neural DSP 410 Kali. This is an awesome plugin, I use it all the time, but the presets that I've dialed in specifically to take pedals really well, it's my platform presets, and I'm going to make those available today. The IRs, all the settings are all geared around making those things sound absolutely killer. So that's the setup, and let's start right at the top with a clean sound. Alright, so for my first tip, we actually have to turn the Overdrive pedal off. The reason for this is we need to check out the clean sound, because there's a couple of crucial characteristics that we need to have in that clean sound. Let me also turn that reverb and delay off. Let's listen out for a very important characteristic here. Even if I go to a split position on the pickups, there's a little bit of grit, there's a little bit of saturation on that clean tone. It's not a pristine, sparkly, lovely sounding clean tone, right? And that's really important. In my experience, if you have a clean tone that is too clean, it doesn't actually work so well with Overdrive pedals. It might sound great for really nice compressed clean tones, but when it comes to putting these things on, it just doesn't really work as well. So having that little bit of sort of saturation, really important. We put that Overdrive pedal on, it just works instantly so much better. So that's my first tip. Alright, for my next tip, tip number 2, watch the amount of gain versus volume. A lot of people might start off with lower volume and more gain from their Overdrive pedal. And whilst that can work, a lot of the time various Overdrive pedals sound better when you actually crank the volume and dial back that gain or distortion. And when you sweep through the volume, sometimes certain pedals, they actually have a complete mid shift, a different EQ curve, depending on where you are. The Apex preamp seems quite linear in that regard, but certain pedals, like Freedom and BODs and stuff, when you play with a volume and overdrive, more volume, less overdrive, less volume, more overdrive, it's a complete different sounding Overdrive pedal. Generally, because the clean sound has a little bit of grit in it, we don't need as much overdrive or gain from the pedal. Thus we can play with the volume a little bit more and just kind of tailor the gain saturation depending if we're doing rhythm. Even that's probably a little bit too much. And then if we want a little bit more of a lead sound, we can crank that up and play with the EQ settings as well. So definitely play with the volume versus the gain settings, and don't be afraid to dial that gain back, crank that volume up for the ultimate heavy tone. All right, let's move on to tip number 3. Tip number 3, it's all about the cabs, the IRs. And for me, you might be the same. It's an absolute time pit at times. Luckily, the preset pack that I've released for the Cali has some really, really killer IRs that I've dialed in over many, 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 many months. But it's generally the first thing that I play around with when I get an amp tone. I don't go straight to EQs. I keep the pedals fairly sort of linear, 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock. Keep the amp fairly sort of in the center as well. But I start auditioning IRs very, very early in the process of making a killer drive tone. So let's listen to the IRs that I've got going on here. You can see right here I'm on MCR platform 1, which is the first preset in the pack. Listen when we go through these sounds. You hear that mid-range push? That would be great for leads. Now, there's a little bit of EQ difference, but most of that change is coming from the IR, the speaker. So obviously this is a neural DSP product, so it actually has a bunch of really, really very, very good mics already in there, dynamic mics, condensers, all that stuff. Usually, as good as the neural DSPs are, my ears are a little bit tuned into certain IRs that I've kind of really got a little bit more of a sort of a connection with. But you could totally play around with the included speakers on a plugin like Cali and you'd get amazing results. But in this case, I'm using IRs. And like I mentioned, that's the first thing that I start playing around with, that speaker or the IR. And I do that way before I start thinking about tweaking the EQ. So amp stage, clean, and then IRs, and then move on to the final EQs and so on. Let's move on to the next tip. Alright, for my next tip, it's all about the EQ. You gotta remember we have EQ in the amp and also EQ in the pedal. So I like to start off with EQ in the amp because that's what the pedal's going into. And if that's not right, then the overall sound is not gonna sound right. So if we turn the overdrive pedal off, I'm not doing anything too crazy. I'm just pulling a little bit of the mids out of the sound. And sometimes I might pull mids out because the IR has a little bit of a broader mid-range palette. Bass, whilst it might sound great isolated, in the context of a track and a mix, it's going to be overpowering, so we don't want to go right in like this. As woolly and huge as that sounds in here, more bass from the pedal. You know, that's a lot of fun, but in the context of a track, it would just get absolutely buried. And the top end and the presence and stuff, this is a very, very sort of delicate area. And again, it really does depend on the IR. Some IRs, they might sound quite bright. Some IRs, they might not sound as bright and they need a little bit of a boost on the top end, either via the presence or the treble. So if I put that pedal on and just turn the gain down, pull that treble back. Basically, when I do split tones, I want to hear that sort of bite in the overdrive sound, but overall, when I'm on full humbucker, I just want a nice balanced overdrive sound. I want that kind of tightness. I want to imagine the sort of mid-range coming through on a mix. Some pedals have tone knobs where others have EQ sections like this, but generally the EQ on the overdrive pedal, because it's going into the amp, it's going to be more of a subtle type of thing. So even if we just crank the bass, the middle, and the treble, I can tell it's a little bit kind of less defined, but it's not drastic, it's not crazy. If we did those settings on the amp, that would be something that would hear, whoa, like immediately. So play around with the EQ, think about the IRs, what balance between the IRs and EQs is going to work for your particular tone, and yeah, have fun dialing those in. Let's move on to my next tip. Alright, for my fifth and final tip, it's all about that low cut and high cut. If you imagine a real cab, a real speaker, or combo, or stack, generally it doesn't have a 20 Hz to 20 kHz frequency response. It's way less than that. So a lot of plugins by default basically have too much woolly bottom end coming through and too much harsh top end coming through. It's not representing what a real amp would do. Obviously guys like Neural DSP, they really know what they're doing. So a lot of their cabs factor that in. What I'm going to show you here is the IRs that I've included with my pack. Notice how the top end and low end is really cut away. So that way later on when you're mixing and stuff, it's not as crucial to go grab an EQ like I have on the screen here, to then go in and put a low cut filter. So we could right click on that shape, make that a low cut, and generally we'd have something around about 24 dB per octave. So it's big, but it's not too big. Now notice that when I take this EQ off, that curve is very much the same, even though I haven't applied that curve. And that's because in the IR itself and some of the settings, I've already factored that in for you. So there's less of a need to then load this type of EQ after the plugin. But I would always load this type of EQ. It could be something in Logic, Ableton. In this case, I'm using Pro Q3 by FabFilter. And it's just something to get rid of that really low guck, you know? If we just isolate that for a second, turn this back on and just listen to this stuff. You know, if we go lower, 40 Hertz, there's nothing really that belongs down in that real deep stuff, you know, from a guitar. Unless we have extended range stuff, and then we might get down to like 45, 50 Hertz and stuff like that. But generally, we're gonna have to be very careful with those lower frequencies. And if you haven't tried putting a low cut and high cut after your amp block, then definitely start doing that and just get into the habit of every single channel, low cut, high cut, and just leave only the frequencies that need to be there, the frequencies that sound natural to a heavy tone. So let's go through presets 1 through 6 so you get an idea what's going to be in the pack. And the next preset. Bit of a broader mid, that will really cut through and work well for leads and riffs. Alright, preset number 4. Preset number 5. And finally, preset number 6. Alright, good luck and have fun dialing in those heavy overdrive tones. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. Otherwise, smash your biggest, heaviest riff, all over that subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next video. Take it easy for now. Bye.